Good afternoon, and welcome to our session on what are the new models accelerating educational outcomes. I am Sam Gyimah. I was a member of parliament in the UK, an education minister. I did early years, schools, and then higher education, as well as science and innovation. And now I'm a founder of SGN Capital Partners. We've got a fantastic panel here today. Dr. Badr, who's CEO of the Misk Foundation, with excellent leadership track record of leading organizations. We're going to hear a bit more about his organization soon. Noëlla, Coursaris, Musunka, CEO and founder of the Malaika Foundation. Kimmelman, and who's the CEO and the co-founder of the NewGlobe Foundation, which I've been very inspired by. Jay and I had a conversation a couple of days ago and inspired by what he's been doing in Kenya. And Varkey, the CEO of GEMS Education. So thank you all for joining us here this afternoon. And what I like to do at the start of these panels is sometimes just unpick the assumptions in the question that we're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about educational outcomes. And educational outcomes, if you are in the global north versus the global south, you want them to be the same, but the context is very different. Mm-hmm. So if I were to start with you, Dino, given the footprint that you've got, what are we talking about when we talk about education in this context, just so we can all be on the same page?
Look, today, if you're looking at education within the global context, and actually the easier way to probably phrase it is as follows. Just by virtue of being able to improve PISA, which obviously is a standardized sort of global measure that countries participate in order to evaluate how well they're doing, if we were able to move every single country to the average of PISA, which is about 400 in terms of the score, you would be able to add 150 to $200 trillion to economic value add globally. Unfortunately, we're not there. So there is a huge inequity and disparity.
And what age are we talking about?
So I obviously will speak to primary and secondary education. So typically you're talking about, call it 3 years old to 18 years old. So obviously the PISA tests typically are done when you're a little bit older, but it's the only sort of global measure that we have to try and compare and contrast where countries are. And frankly, today, there is a huge disparity in terms of the countries that are able to ensure that they're developing humanity and their human capital appropriately versus what we see in very many parts of the world, whether it's markets that Jay operates in, even in our part of the world, even in our region. Jay just mentioned something to me, which is, look, on aggregate, typically, if you're looking at this region and specifically public education, I think you said 35 to 40% of students can't even read. If you're looking at it from the UAE, which is where most of our operations are, you're actually still talking about Emiratis in public education that will typically have 2 to 4 grade levels below what they should be in terms of their reading and writing capability. And frankly, literacy and fluency is such an important part of being able to access education. So when you're dealing with that as a starting point, yeah, that highlights a bit of the challenge.
No, I can see that. And the way our education system works, if you can't read, nothing works, right? I mean, even doing math becomes quite difficult if you can't read and understand some of the problems. But, I mean, there's also sort of a wider aspect to education, Dr. Badr, would you say? I mean, while we are still on definitions, so we've got reaching PISA standards, foundational education, which you've talked about. Would you want to sort of expand that or narrow that? How do you see it?
Of course. First of all, welcome to Saudi Arabia.
Thank you.
Education is not only about the knowledge that we impart to students. It's about building the character, instilling the value, and raising a new generation. If you look at it from that point of view, that holistic point of view, you understand that when you talk about, for example, the panel here is about the role of technology and sometimes the disparity between North and South. We need to look at it at the context of, are we empowering our future and are we preparing our youth for the future? And in that, my answer is there is a big way to go. I think there is a big focus on scores like PISA score, and that only measures the knowledge part, and it does not measure all the other aspects that the education system needs to instill in students.
So very interesting. So the character as well as the scores are very important. And in that sense, technology can be a double-edged sword. I mean, technology can be a force for good, and we'll come on to some of the challenges around technology. But Jay, if I can come to you in a second. As an investor, one of the things about education and technology is it's always lagged technology adoption, right? People talk about the S-curve of adoption, and in every other walk of our life, technology's making us more efficient, more productive, all of this. But we still have the basic model from day one, right? Teacher, students. It used to be a blackboard. Now, if you are in the global north anyway, a whiteboard, some would say. How do you see it, the role of, where are we in the adoption curve?
Yeah, I mean, I think that depends on where in the world you are and where we're focused on, right? So I'm from Kenya, so global south, and if you look at what education looks like today, you have this foundational learning gap that Dino mentioned as well. 70% of children from low and middle income countries can't read. The challenge is how to fix that, and technology and data play a big role in that. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to have teachers in classrooms. It's about how do we super enable, how do we supercharge those classrooms and the education system overall with knowledge about where students are so that we can meet them where they are and accelerate them up to where they need to be. Technology can play a big role in that as long as we're also cognizant of what the infrastructure and the resources are in different parts of the world and how do we leverage that.
So coming to the punchline, AI and personalized learning, is this really the moment? Are we going to see it transform what goes on in the classroom and therefore educational outcomes? Jay, I'll
Sure.
put that to you first.
Yes, and I think it's about how we apply that AI and how we apply the personalized learning, right? So again, sort of staying focused on Global South for a moment, all of these tools start with data, right? You can't feed the models, you can't personalize the learning unless you know where students are. And across much of the world, we have a dearth of data, of information, right? The UN is considering dropping one of the Sustainable Development Goals, 4.1.1, which is measuring across the country whether or not 10-year-olds can read with understanding, because there's not enough information about that. That's a tragedy. In order to have personalized learning, we need to support governments and to figure out where are students, both at an individual level, but also at a system-wide level, so that we can personalize and get learning to students where they are and get them up to where they need to be. So I think AI will be a big part of that, but it starts with how do we provide the right materials to the right teachers at the right time? How do we help governments make sense of this, hopefully soon to be a mass of data, to figure out what are the leading indicators, what interventions are wise to invest in? And so I think for much of the world where I'm focused, that's the right entry point. It will be different in different regions.
And Noëlla, I'm going to come on to you in a second, but before that, just so we're clear, I mean, when we talk about AI in the classroom, are we talking about replacing textbooks with some fancy technology? What do we mean? And what are you doing in your schools?
So I think the digitization of textbooks, frankly, started 20, 25 years ago. So that isn't necessarily what I think we're talking about here. Again, it's always important to give context. Global teacher shortage, just to meet SDG 4, and that is, again, to try and provide a quality sort of education, provide access to a quality education to every child. We're short of 70 million teachers. The forecast for where the education sector will be in 2030 cites that at 100 million teacher shortage. So the reality is that is perhaps not a shortage that can be bridged. And that's where I think a lot of us think that AI can actually be a really powerful catalyst to bridge that gap. And look, at the end of the day, what are we talking about? We're talking about virtual tutors with digital avatars. We're talking about intelligent tutoring systems. You're talking about personalized learning and feedback loops, personalized assessment systems, or what I like to generically or generally call sort of an AI-driven adaptive learning engine, which for everybody is the holy grail of education. The reality is we're not there yet, all right? Because while you have thousands of education technology companies out there today, they're essentially tapping into the periphery, the small subsets of education. There isn't a sort of a holistic solution yet. But within that context, and again, I think we spoke to it, the role of the teacher must change, but I don't think you can replace the need for a great teacher. I mean, a great teacher, frankly, is still required to sort of inspire human potential, and I think that's enduring.
Yeah. I mean, for as long as I've been looking at education from a sort of policy perspective, teachers and their hours and how little time they have has been an issue. And so if AI can help them be productive, it sounds to me like it's a good thing. But Noëlla, I want to come to you because you operate in a unique context with your foundation. How does this conversation resonate? Personalized learning, technology-driven, you can understand where the gaps are, teach the gaps, help teachers. Your foundation, how does that resonate?
So we've been working 17 years in the Congo in a part of a community where there's no access of water, electricity, infrastructure. So you're dealing with a lot of infrastructure issues. And this is the case of so many underprivileged communities all over the world. When we see the statistic, 250 million children doesn't attend school. It's quite an alarming numbers. But when we work in the area where we're working, you have to build a school. The school needs to be on green energy. The solar panel, you need to renew it every 5 years. The computer that you're using in the classroom, you need to charge them every night if the power is enough strong. The life of a computer laptop is 4 years, so you need to update, you need to make them ship arriving there. Secondly, you need to train the teachers, not only to use the computer and teach with it, but you need to teach them to how to maintain these computers. To have internet access, you need to have satellites. A satellite that works well, but when the rainy season, 6 months of the year, you have rainy season and it's heavy, the internet is not so great. So we're working with a lot of remote amazing teachers, a lot of remote incredible tools, but we are able to implement them when the internet goes very well, or we are able to download all of that and be able. But all of that is very important to constantly updating the teachers, their skills, updating the curriculum, make them understand the children how to use the application. This is children don't have phones in their home. They're not on social media, where all the information they're getting from IT and AI or etc., it's from the school. And they have a limited time because we have 430 students at the school that start from 5 years old to 18 years old. We are the only school in Africa that Apple teach every Saturday. All the application on the phone, but it's very funny because when we needed to send all the iPads going to the school, we were only able to send 5 iPads at a time because you have lithium in iPad. And what is crazy is Congo give 75% of the materials for technology, space, for green cars, lithium, and etc. So you're working with challenges. But how the children reacting with the IT, it's fantastic because they're growing, it's something new. We're teaching them, we have the school and then we have an educational community center where we have 5,000 youth and adults coming to study there. So our work touch 3 generations. The mother, the father that come to learn to read and write at the center, then start to use a computer. We have the brothers and sisters coming to learn at the center, and then we have the student at the school. So they have a very good conversation. And we teach robotics, we have laboratory, we are one of the top 10 advanced schools in the Congo, but you have to work, you have to be very conscious of the challenge that is existing not only for Malaika, for all these communities.
Very, very, very good. And Dr. Badr, I'm going to come to you in a second, but Jay, just coming back to you. I mean, you've looked at large public education systems. what is the leapfrog mechanism here, right? Because the AI revolution is happening, whether it's, and you can deploy it in many different ways, content generation, and in some ways enhance productivity and make learning more productive. Can you see a leapfrog mechanism to make this widely available and real?
Yes. We work with governments around the global south to do this, and millions of kids every day. It's about looking at all the different challenges that face public education systems and addressing those holistically, right? So it's not just about the content for teachers. It is definitely also about the content for teachers. How do we make sure that research, proven lessons are being delivered across entire countries? But it's also about the motivation and accountability. How do we make sure governments know when teachers are in class teaching? And how do we know when students are in class learning? How do we use that to do coaching? How do we pull all these together, but do it in, as my colleague mentioned, in a way that takes into account the realities of the infrastructure? 90% of the schools we work with do not have reliable access to electricity, do not have reliable access to the internet. How do you design a technology system that takes advantage of the latest and greatest, but works in an environment where most children in the world live today?
Yeah, the environment is crucial.
And Dr. Badr, I mean, you touched on education, and so educating the whole child,
Yes.
right, and summarize you fairly. And that also implies you're thinking about what happens beyond school.
Definitely.
And do you think that when you look at the education system, that technology is being employed in a fast enough way to prepare students for the workforce of the future? Do you see that? Or another way I can ask the question is, what are you doing to make sure that on the technology side, that they're being prepared for the workforce of the future?
In Saudi Arabia, we're blessed that the population between 10 to 30 is 99% connected to the internet. So we have parents here where if you ask them, do you want your kids to spend more time on the screen, they'll say, of course, no. They are overexposed to screens. Yet technology does have a space in the education. Definitely, the skilling part is important. They need to know how to use computers, how to access information through computers. But it's not only about technology. And preparing a person who's holistically ready for the future job market that is disrupted by technology, by AI, and so on, this person needs to have complementary skills to what technology can bring. And the technology, the complementary skills comes from the social skills, the critical thinking skills, the athletic skills. We, in our schools, for example, Misk school, we have 100 different types of after-school activities a menu that students can choose from, and they spend 2 hours working on those every day, every school day. So the aim here is to develop a holistic person, a holistic leader that can contribute to society in the future.
Thank you. And Dino, when you look at the technology landscape, are there any, and you said there are thousands of these, but what are the attractive companies you see that are really making a difference in the classroom?
If I'm being honest, actually, for operators like us, we're now gravitating towards some of the bigger players. Because if you think about Microsoft, Google, and the other 4 or 5 that are frankly on the leading edge of AI and AGI development, it makes more sense for us to engage with them to try and develop a more consolidated solution using artificial intelligence in order to enhance the nature of our provision. So for me, it's not the smaller players, because they're always there and they will continue to improve, but actually, can we do something more significant with some of the larger players?
On content? On
so look,
supporting teachers? I'm just trying to see kind of what you'd get.
Remember I mentioned the AI-powered sort of adaptive learning engine. Well, if you think about Microsoft Teams, which I'm sure a lot of us have used over the course of the pandemic and after, actually what Microsoft have done now is they've made Teams a learning engine. It's powered by Copilot now, which again is a version of, but then starting to work through the way in which that can support a teacher. You've got AI-powered nudges for teachers to say, well, actually, you may want to focus the lesson delivery in this particular way. It's still, for me, in its infancy, but the potential is there. There is one point I wanted to make, which is obviously we're very focused on the technology, inevitably. But the reality is curriculum reform and assessment reform is perhaps much more important.
Yeah.
Today, it's unacceptable that it takes 25 to 30 years for innovation in industry to make its way into our classrooms. So if I take very dated technologies, so Python, which all of us will know is kind of a programming language, 3D printing, before it was formally assessed in a classroom, made its way into core curriculum, it's 25 to 30 years later. And that hasn't necessarily shifted. Today, if our schools have centers of excellence, which they do in artificial intelligence, robotics, we were just talking about enterprise, social impact, and innovation, all of those are done after school. They're co-curricular, not part of the core curriculum. So I think we have a fundamental issue because no matter how quickly technology advances, if your underlying curriculum content isn't relevant for the future we're going to enter into, then actually you're always going to have a bit of a mismatch. The other thing is assessment reform. I mean, look, the reality is we actually need to be able to assess a learner's ability to unlearn, relearn, and frankly find clarity and connection and complexity. Right? We have to be able to test and assess the quality of the question now, not the quality of the answer. Because the information is ubiquitous. You can access it, right? So the answer is no longer relevant. I think in the previous panel, they were talking about prompt engineering. Well, that's asking questions. So we have to be able to assess the quality of a learner's question in order to be able to actually develop, again, human capital in the way that we need to.
Very, very helpful. I just want to go back to this aspect of access and the fact that so much of the world's population now has a smartphone and they can watch Real Madrid play on their smartphone. Yeah. So surely they could use...
That was not a good thing. They just lost 4-0 over
That's right, yeah,
Barcelona.
I was going to pick Arsenal, my own team. But you can watch that from anywhere. So presumably through that you can access some of these personalized learning tools that we've discussed. But at the same time, you don't want children to spend too much time on screens. So this is a difficult one, and I'll throw it to all of you to see who picks it up. How can you use technology effectively, but at the same time not have children spending sometimes years of their life staring at a screen and that is not productive or healthy for them mentally? Jay, it sounds like you're itching to answer.
Well, I was going to say, before we answer that question, I would urge us to also think about access beyond the device and the connectivity. Children cannot access AI, the information that Dino just mentioned, if they can't read with comprehension. Yeah. And if we're talking about right now 70% of the population of low and middle income countries, which is 85% of the children on the planet, cannot read with real comprehension by the age of 10, that's the access issue that I believe we should be focused on. Like, we can't solve access to the next generation of technology, the next generation of jobs, if we don't solve foundational learning. And we haven't. The world has not. The vast majority of children in the world go to school for 6 to 10 years, and they graduate without being able to read. We can't access the next generation of technology until we fix that. So that's maybe a tangent, but
I mean, technology as an enabler to that kind
exactly.
of access. And screens? Too much screen time? Too little screen time?
There's not enough, frankly, because there's not enough access where we work.
Exactly.
If I may add, the approach that we take is, in our days, when we were younger, nobody had to push us to play sport. That was natural. That's the only thing that we could do after school. Unfortunately, now, it's something that you need to incentivize, encourage, and structure. That's something that we emphasize in our curricula, where we have one of our schools has a specialized sports curriculum. The others make it very incentivize it in various ways to make sure that everybody participates, so that we could tackle the issues that come from screens like obesity and high blood sugar and so on, like the side effects that should be tackled from a young age. You know how the society, when these students graduate, forming bad habits stay with them. So we try to instill these habits at a very young age.
Okay, so we've got a few minutes left, and next question I want everyone to have a go at. So, starting with you, Dino, what are the skills you think the next generation need to be equipped with to be resilient and to succeed in the workforce?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not going to be a singular answer. It's going to certainly cover some of the things that Dr. Badr mentioned. Look, our world is complex, rapidly evolving, and frankly, the only constant for learners and our children is frankly going to be their values, right? Character education. That's the one constant that they can rely on that will give them a framework to make the right choices in a rapidly changing context. So for me, values and character education is a big part of it. And then at the end of it, it's simply, look, a sheer love of learning. Can you inculcate a pure love of learning that then will last them their entire life? Because learning is going to be a lifelong endeavor.
I like that. Love of learning. Jay?
In addition to sort of foundational learning concepts, I think, as we talked about how information is becoming ubiquitous and the changes in what people will do as they graduate, I think some of these 21st century skills, which are not digital skills, but are communication, collaboration, being confident and able to communicate those ideas, that's going to be critical no matter what happens.
Noëlla?
Happy. I think a lot of us have children. We need children to be happy. Happy to go to school, happy to come back home, think out of the box, being resilient, being positive. Don't be scared of failures. We need to incorporate in curriculum at school the sport, the music, the arts, and we need to include parents too. I have a school, etc. I follow closely the education of my children in England, but a lot of parents, when I sit down with them, they completely lost. School has overwhelmed them with information of newsletter, WhatsApp group, etc. But they're not informed exactly how we can help our own children to be able to study, to be ready for the test, how we can help them. And there is a gap. I just don't want to receive emails of what's going on at the school and etc. We want to know how can we help our children
Be happy.
Be happy, but help them too, because they have this test, A-levels, GCSE, etc. So we need, as parents too, to be ready and lower the stress of our children. And I do think reading is very important. We need to make compulsory in classroom every day to read 15 minutes to our children, because they need to be out of this world of technology and understand the story and be happy reading.
Fantastic. Dr. Badr?
If I want to summarize it with one thing, I would definitely say learning how to learn. The reason is that we are bombarded with information, we're bombarded with data. And having that skill within us or within our children to be able to understand that data, to discern and to make sense of it, is something that would last them even in a generation where more data, AI, technology is surrounding us.
Brilliant. And I've got one final question, because in all my time in education, the education sector, people are always very good at saying, this is not really for us. It doesn't really work for us because of all these challenges. So I'm going to ask a different question, which is, if we had Sam Altman or Elon Musk here, what would you ask of them to do that would help transform education from your perspective in terms of AI? And we've got 1 minute, so we've got to be quick.
God, I mean, look, hard, very hard question. Look, it's, digital avatars or sort of digital teaching assistants. That's certainly one of the things that would help.
Digital
teaching assistants, virtual.
So AI robots to teach.
Effectively to support and enable a teacher.
Good. We've got 40 seconds, so Jay, quick.
Continuous research on what works at teaching each individual concept. The world does not know the best way to teach every concept.
Brilliant. Noëlla?
Support teachers and find the personality of each child, how they will learn, because not everybody can learn the same ways.
I have to say something different. So I'll say,
Of course.
yes, I'll say back off, slow down, and, give our kids
love that.
space to learn.
I love that. Space to learn.
Yes.
I think that is absolutely brilliant. And as you can see, this is a very passionate panel. And I'm sure that if we're to open this discussion to the audience, we'll get even more divergent views and more passion. Thank you all for coming, and I enjoyed that very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, guys.